The galaxy was vast and teeming with life and civilizations that had reached far beyond what humanity could imagine in its earliest days. There were species that had built empires and others that thrived on their advancements in technology and warfare. They were proud and powerful and thought themselves the ultimate masters of their domains. They had never faced an enemy they could not outmatch or outwit in any way. Their superiority was undeniable until now. The silence of space was suddenly broken by a strange signal, one that carried across the stars to the ears of many alien species. The signal was encrypted, yet it was clear that it came from outside their known territories. The message was simple but chilling: "Warning, Terran Warship spotted." No one knew what it meant, but it was undeniable that it was a threat or a warning from a species that was not known to them, one of the most powerful factions. The Xalneri quickly picked up on the signal. Their technology was unmatched by most of the other galactic empires. They were advanced in every sense of the word. Their ships, their weapons, their shields were all far beyond what the majority of the galaxy had seen before. And yet here was a message that made them pause. Their ships had no designations for Terran markings. They had no idea where these humans were from or what they wanted. Despite the initial confusion, the Xalneri were not ones to back down. They sent scouts to the coordinates where the signal had originated, but as they arrived, they found no trace of the signal's source. The system they had been led to seemed empty and barren. Their ships moved cautiously, scanning for anything of interest, but the space was dead. No signs of civilization, no signs of life at all. But something was wrong. The Xalneri began to feel an unease in the pit of their stomachs. The signals kept coming, each one more direct, each one more insistent. They were being watched, yet no ship was visible to their sensors. Nothing was showing up on their radar. Despite the warnings growing louder and more frequent, they began to panic slightly. No race had ever dared approach their borders before, and now this signal was calling them out with no explanation and no warning. And then it appeared, a small blip on their scanners. At first, it was too faint to be believed a single ship, but unlike any they had ever seen. Its hull was scared and battered, but there was something undeniably intimidating about it. The ship was unmistakable. It was human. They had heard of this species before, but they had written them off as primitive, little more than a fleeting curiosity of the galaxy. Now here it was, this lone Terran warship sitting alone at the edge of their territory, radiating a quiet but undeniable strength. The Xalneri commanders debated among themselves, unsure of how to react. What did this mean? What was the purpose of this ship? Its presence made no sense. Why would humans send just one ship? It was far too small to pose any real threat, and yet they could not shake the feeling that something larger was unfolding. The lone warship moved closer as the Xalneri leaders watched in silence. Their fleets were waiting in the wings, poised for action if needed, but none of them dared make a move just yet. They waited, unsure of what would happen next. The Xalneri fleet held its position just outside the edge of the system. Their warships were massive and imposing compared to the small Terran vessel that had appeared on their scanners. The single ship of humanity stood still like a lone wolf in a sea of predators. No one had yet made a move, but the silence between the two sides grew heavier with every passing moment. The tension was palpable. The Xalneri commanders debated among themselves, unsure whether to engage or simply observe. The humans had made no attempt to approach their ships, yet they did not make any effort to retreat either. Their decision was clear: they had to act. After several minutes of silence, the Xalneri flagship broke the stillness, a massive warship that commanded attention with its sleek black hull and countless weapon systems. It hailed the Terran vessel directly. The transmission was clear and full of condescension. The Xalneri commander's voice echoed through the comms as he spoke to the humans with an air of superiority. "This is Commander Ferex of the Xalneri fleet. You are trespassing in Xalneri territory. Identify yourselves and explain your presence." His tone was one of cold authority, but it carried a hint of curiosity. They had expected the humans to cower or to respond with fear. Instead, they received only silence. For several long moments, the humans were not responding. The silence was unsettling, yet the Terran ship did not retreat, and no other signals were sent. It simply hovered where it was, its hull dark against the vastness of space. Then unexpectedly a transmission from the Terran vessel came through. It was crisp and clear. The voice of a human officer rang out without hesitation or fear. "You have trespassed in human space, Commander Vareks. Your presence here is not welcome. If you do not withdraw immediately, we will not hesitate to defend ourselves." The words were blunt and unwavering. The Xalnari commander frowned. The humans were bold and direct, something they had not expected from a species so young and supposedly primitive. "Defend yourselves." The commander laughed lightly to himself, as if it were a joke. He glanced at his officers. "This is not a species we need to concern ourselves with. They are insignificant, no matter what threats they make." He turned to his tactical officer. "Begin scanning the ship. See if it's even capable of defending itself." The officers complied quickly, scanning the Terran ship with a mix of curiosity and disdain. The ship was not anything special in terms of size or shape. It looked old and worn, with battle scars visible along its surface. The ship's energy readings were unremarkable at first glance, but something about the ship's behavior seemed to hint at something more. The Xalnari had seen ships far more advanced, but the humans' ability to withstand this much time in space was something new. Back on the Terran Warship, the crew remained calm in the face of their first encounter with a vastly superior force. They knew the odds were against them, but they were prepared. They had dealt with far worse in the past. Their message was simple, clear, and direct. They were not here to make friends. They were here to protect what was theirs, and they would not back down from a fight. The Xalnari took a moment to assess the situation. They were at a crossroads. Should they engage or take the offer to withdraw? They had never considered humanity a threat, but now they were forced to acknowledge that these humans were not like the others they had encountered before. Something about their presence demanded respect. The silent standoff continued as both sides waited for the other to make the first move, and as time passed the tensions only grew. The galaxy held its breath. The Xalnari fleet circled the Terran warship. Its massive ships dwarfed the small vessel, but despite their overwhelming numbers, they couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. There was an unease that settled over the fleet, even as they positioned themselves for what seemed like an easy victory. The tension was rising, and for the first time in a long while the Xalnari commanders felt a flicker of doubt. Commander Vareks paced on the bridge of his flagship, his mind racing with the possibilities. He was a seasoned warrior, a leader who had crushed countless enemies across the galaxy, yet this encounter was different. He had never faced a species like the humans. Their boldness, their unwillingness to back down despite the clear gap in power, was something he didn't understand. His officers were silent, their eyes glued to their consoles, monitoring the situation as he considered their options. Should they destroy the Terran vessel immediately and send a message to the rest of the galaxy, or should they try to communicate further? There was no real danger. They were the dominant force here, but something about the situation gnawed at him. Finally, Vareks made a decision with a wave of his hand. He turned to his communications officer. "Open a channel to the Terran vessel." His voice was calm, but carried an edge of impatience. "This is your last warning. Surrender now, or we will be forced to take action." The comms officer hesitated for a moment before confirming, "Channel open, sir." The response from the Terran ship came almost immediately. It was the same voice that had spoken before, steady and unwavering. "We are not here to negotiate or to surrender. We are here to defend what is ours." The words were simple, but carried the weight of a promise. Vareks' eyes narrowed, and he turned to his tactical officer. "Are we receiving any hostile signals from the Terran ship?" The officer quickly checked the data and shook his head. "No, sir, the ship is not actively targeting us, nor are there any signs of weapon systems charging. They are not making any aggressive moves." Vareks studied the image of the ship on his screen again. The worn hull, the damage it had clearly taken in its travels, and yet there was something about it that did not sit right with him. It was not the ship that bothered him. It was the humans themselves, their message, their stance, everything about them suggested they were not like other races he had encountered before. "There's something strange about them," Vareks muttered under his breath, his voice barely audible to the officers around him. "They are unafraid. They are not acting like the other species we've encountered." His second-in-command stepped forward. "Commander, if they are not showing aggression, then perhaps we should disengage and return to the fleet. We still don't know what they're capable of. We can't afford to waste time with this unknown." Varex looked at his officer for a long moment before shaking his head. "No, we will proceed. We cannot show weakness." He paused. "But we must be careful. These humans are not what they seem." Meanwhile, on the Terran Warship, the crew remained calm, their eyes focused on their own screens. Each officer knew the stakes. They knew that their mission was to stand their ground. No matter what happened, they weren't just fighting for their ship, they were fighting for their future, for humanity's place in the galaxy. They would not back down. The standoff continued as both sides prepared for the inevitable clash. But despite the alien fleet's confidence, there was a growing sense that the humans were not to be underestimated, no matter how small they seemed. The Xalnari fleet moved into position surrounding the lone Terran warship. The massive ships hovered just beyond the reach of its weapons. Their crews were confident their technology outmatched anything the humans could deploy, yet something about the way the Terran vessel sat so still in the vastness of space made them uneasy. The warship's hull was scarred from years of battle, and its weapons systems had not yet been activated. But the humans aboard were waiting, they were calculating, they were ready. Commander Varex sat in his command chair watching intently as the tension in the air grew thick. His fleet was positioned perfectly. The humans had no chance of escaping this moment. He expected the next move to be decisive. They would either surrender or the battle would begin. He had not yet fully decided which outcome he preferred. But what happened next was something no one expected. Without warning, the Terran warship fired a single shot, a burst of energy so focused and precise that it cut through the shields of the nearest Xalnari vessel like butter. The alien ship rocked violently. As its shields flickered and failed, the blast caused catastrophic damage to its engines, and the ship began to list uncontrollably. The Xalnari commander stared in disbelief. His fleet had expected to outmaneuver the humans to destroy them quickly, but now they were seeing something entirely different. The humans were not playing by their rules. They weren't relying on overwhelming firepower. They were relying on precision and strategy. "Report," Varex barked. The tactical officer scrambled to assess the damage. "We've lost a ship, sir. The Terrans, their weapons are far more advanced than we anticipated. Their targeting systems are flawless." The officer hesitated. "They seem to be able to hit weak points on our ships with incredible accuracy." Varex's fists clenched in frustration. He had been too confident, too dismissive of the humans. He had assumed they were like every other race in the galaxy, but now he was beginning to see just how wrong he had been. The Terran warship did not stop there. It fired again and again, each shot finding its mark, each blast disabling another alien ship. One by one, the Xalnari fleet began to falter. Their advanced shields could not hold up against the precise targeting of the humans. Their weapon systems were ineffective as the Terran ship danced around them like a predator stalking its prey. The Xalnari ships began to fall into disarray, their formation breaking apart as they scrambled to respond to the unexpected onslaught. The humans were relentless and their tactics were flawless. They used the terrain around them, asteroid fields and debris, scattered throughout the system, to their advantage. They lured the aliens into traps and ambushed them at every turn. Commander Varex watched in growing horror as his fleet was torn apart by the precision of the human assault. The battle that had seemed so certain in his favor was rapidly slipping out of his control. The humans had transformed the battlefield into a game of chess, where every move was calculated and deliberate. The once mighty Xalnari fleet that had been so sure of its superiority was now scrambling to regroup. Their ships were damaged, their morale shattered. They could not match the tenacity and brilliance of the humans' tactics. On the Terran warship, the crew moved with quiet efficiency, each officer working in perfect unison. The captain stood at the helm, calm and focused as he issued commands with precision. They had known the Xalnari would not back down easily, but they were prepared. They had trained for this moment. They had built their ship to withstand battles just like this. As the fight raged on, it became clear that the Xalnari had underestimated humanity. They had thought of them as weak and unworthy of consideration. But now they were learning the hard way that humanity would never be an easy target, that when pushed to the brink, humanity would fight back with everything they had. The battle was far from over, but the tide was turning, and for the first time since the conflict began, it was the Xalneri who found themselves on the defensive. As the battle raged on, the Xalneri fleet continued to struggle against the relentless precision of the Terran Warship. Each attack they launched seemed to fall short, while the human vessel danced through space like a shadow slipping through their grasp. The damage was mounting, but the Xalneri refused to back down. They were not a race that gave up easily, and they knew they had the numbers to overwhelm the humans if they could just regroup and find their footing. But the longer the fight continued, the more the Xalneri began to realize that this was not just a random skirmish. It was a carefully orchestrated strategy, and they were playing right into the hands of the humans. Every move they made seemed to be anticipated. Every tactic they used seemed to be countered before it could even be executed. It was as if the humans were one step ahead of them at every turn. Commander Varex sat in his command chair watching as another of his ships went down in flames. The damage was becoming too much to ignore. His officers were panicking now. They were sending frantic reports of failing systems and shattered shields. The Terran Warship had caused chaos in their ranks, and it was only getting worse. Varex's frustration was palpable, but he refused to show weakness. He had seen empires fall before, but he had never seen anything like this. The Terrans were not just fighting for survival. They were fighting with a purpose. They were using the environment to their advantage, using every asteroid, every piece of debris to turn the system into a deadly maze that the Xalneri could not navigate. It was then that a realization hit Varex like a blow to the chest. This was no longer just a battle. It was a message. The humans were sending something far more significant than their ability to fight. They were showing the galaxy that they were not a race to be underestimated. They were showing that they could stand against anyone, no matter how powerful the enemy. The human ship was no longer just a lone vessel in a distant corner of the galaxy. It was a symbol of something greater, of a species that would not back down in the face of overwhelming odds, that would fight with every resource at their disposal to defend what they believed was theirs. The Xalneri were not just fighting a warship, they were fighting the very spirit of humanity itself. The message had already spread across the galaxy through the many channels. The humans had opened. The Xalneri were not the only ones watching. The battle was being broadcast to other alien empires that had never considered humanity a threat. They had thought the humans were still confined to their small corner of space, struggling to survive. But now they were seeing something different. They were seeing humanity's resolve, and it was unlike anything they had encountered before. In the face of this unexpected resistance, the Xalneri were beginning to question their assumptions about the humans. The smug arrogance that had once defined their attitude toward the species was slowly fading, and in its place was a growing respect for the tenacity of the humans, their ability to fight even when the odds were stacked against them. On the Terran Warship, the crew continued their mission with unwavering focus. Each officer knew what was at stake. They were not just fighting to protect their ship, they were fighting to send a message to the galaxy. They were fighting to ensure that humanity would not be forgotten, that they would not be erased or overlooked by those who thought themselves superior. And as the battle pressed on, the message became clear to all those watching. The humans would not be broken, they would not bow to anyone, and they would fight to the very end to protect what was theirs. The battle was no longer about victory. It was about survival. The Xalneri fleet had been dealt blow after blow by the Terran Warship, and the commanders aboard each alien ship were beginning to panic. The once confident and proud Xalneri were now faced with a situation they had never anticipated. They had underestimated the humans. They had assumed they could crush them easily, but now they were being forced into retreat. The damage to their ships was becoming too much to ignore. Their once imposing fleet had been scattered and crippled by a single human vessel. Commander Varex paced back and forth in his command chair, his mind racing. He had never seen anything like this before, a species so small and insignificant in their eyes turning the tide of battle with nothing more than cunning and precision. His officers looked at him in silence, waiting for him to make a decision, but Varex was struggling. The situation was slipping out of his hands, and he could feel the weight of it pressing down on him. "Commander, we need to pull back," one of his senior officers spoke up. "We are losing ships too quickly. If we stay here, we will be annihilated." The officer's voice was filled with urgency, but Varex could not bring himself to accept the idea of retreating. He had spent years commanding fleets, he had fought in battles across the galaxy, but he had never been in a situation where he had been forced to retreat, especially not from a mere human vessel. Varex clenched his fists. The idea of surrendering to the humans was unacceptable to him. But the situation was growing dire. The remaining Zalnari ships were falling one by one, their shields failing under the precision of the Terran attacks. Their weapons were ineffective against the small but agile human ship. The battle was becoming a one-sided affair, and with each passing minute the Zalnari lost more ground. In the cockpit of the Terran Warship, the crew remained focused. Their captain stood tall at the helm, overseeing the battle with calm determination. Each officer moved with the precision of a well-oiled machine. The human ship was not large, but it was fast, its weapons were powerful and accurate, and its crew was driven by something the Zalnari could not understand. They fought not just for victory, but for survival, for the chance to prove that they belonged in the galaxy, that they could hold their own against any enemy, no matter how powerful. The captain issued another set of commands, and the Terran warship moved once more. With deadly accuracy, it fired on the next Zalnari ship. The blast tore through its shields and sent it spiraling out of control. The remaining Zalnari ships were now in full retreat, their formations scattered as they scrambled to avoid the oncoming fire. The human ship pursued them relentlessly, its weapons lighting up the darkness of space as it took down ship after ship. Back on the Zalnari flagship, Varex's face was tight with frustration and shame. The humans were not just outclassing his fleet, they were humiliating him in front of his officers and his people. He had never known defeat like this before, and it was a bitter pill to swallow. He had thought the Zalnari were untouchable, but now he saw that even the mightiest of empires could fall when they underestimated their enemies. Retreat, Varex finally spat the word out through clenched teeth. Get us out of here. His officers quickly began to relay the orders to the rest of the fleet. The remaining Zalnari ships turned in unison and began to make a hasty retreat from the battle zone. But as they fled, the humans did not stop. They did not allow them to escape without one final message. The Zalnari fleet was retreating in disarray, their once proud ships scattered in every direction, their engines roaring as they accelerated away from the human warship. But the Terrans were not done yet. They did not allow their enemies to slip away without a reminder of the consequences of underestimating them. The battle was far from over, and the humans were determined to make sure the Zalnari felt the weight of their mistake. On the Terran warship, the captain stood resolute, watching the Zalnari ships retreat. His eyes narrowed with a cold resolve. He could see the weakness now. The once dominant force that had surrounded him was crumbling before his very eyes. The Zalnari had underestimated humanity, and they would pay for it. He issued a command without hesitation. Pursue them, don't let them escape. His voice was calm but full of authority. His crew responded without a word. Each officer knew their role, and without delay the warship adjusted its course and began its pursuit of the retreating Zalnari fleet. The smaller human ship cut through space at a speed and agility that the larger Zalnari vessels could not match. They fired again and again, each shot finding its mark with deadly accuracy, tearing into the weakened ships as they fled. The Zalnari ships attempted to scatter and change their formation, but it was too late. The human warship had already cut them off. Each time they tried to break away, the Terrans were right behind them, forcing them into a tighter and tighter corner. It was like a predator closing in on its prey. The Zalnari were helpless to stop the relentless assault that continued to chip away at their remaining forces. Commander Varex watched in fury as his fleet was decimated before him. His mind was clouded with rage and disbelief. He had never felt so powerless in his entire life. He had led his people through countless victories across the galaxy, but here he was facing defeat at the hands of a race he had dismissed as insignificant. Now, humanity was showing him that they were anything but insignificant. His hands gripped the armrests of his chair as he ordered his remaining ships to fall back even further, but it was no use. The humans were closing in too quickly. The damage had already been done. The terror of their assault was undeniable. The Zalnari fleet was in full retreat, and it was clear that they could not escape. As the last of the Zalnari ships tried to make their escape, the captain of the Terran warship made a final call. All weapons fire on the flagship, the command was issued, and the warship fired its most devastating weapons systems. With precise coordination, the flagship of the Xalnari fleet was hit with a barrage of blasts that rocked the ship to its core. The shields failed, and the hull began to buckle under the immense pressure. The flagship of the once mighty Xalnari Empire was now on the verge of collapse. Inside, the flagship commander Ferex could feel the ship shuddering under the assault. His officers scrambled to maintain control, but the damage was too severe. The ship was doomed. He had failed his people, and now they would pay the price for his arrogance. He looked out at the chaos unfolding around him, and for the first time he felt the weight of the defeat. The Terran Warship did not stop. It fired one final shot, and the Xalnari flagship exploded into a brilliant fireball. Its destruction was a clear signal to the rest of the galaxy. Humanity was no longer a fringe species fighting to survive. They were a force to be reckoned with. A new player had emerged, and the galaxy would have to take notice. The final explosion of the Xalnari flagship lit up the cold emptiness of space, a brilliant flash of light that marked the end of the battle and the beginning of a new era. The once formidable fleet was shattered, and the humans had claimed victory. The Terran Warship moved slowly through the remnants of the destroyed Xalnari ships, their twisted wreckage floating like debris in the aftermath of a storm. But despite the carnage, the crew remained calm. Their mission was complete, and humanity had sent its message to the galaxy. On the bridge of the Terran Warship, the captain stood quietly watching the destruction before him. His eyes reflected the devastation, but there was no joy in his gaze, no celebration, just a quiet acknowledgement that this battle had been necessary. The fight had been hard, but the humans had proven their worth. They had shown that they would no longer cower in the shadow of other species. They had made their mark, and they would not be forgotten. The crew was silent as well. Each officer absorbed the gravity of what had just transpired. The battle had been brutal, but it had also been a defining moment for humanity. No longer would they be seen as weak or insignificant. No longer would they be dismissed as just another primitive race scrambling to survive. They had proven they could stand toe-to-toe with the most powerful empires in the galaxy and come out on top. As the captain gave the order to return to the fleet, the comms officer spoke up. "Captain, we are receiving a transmission from the Council." The officer's voice was cautious, but it carried an air of respect. "They want to speak with you." The captain nodded and turned to face the screen. The faces of several high-ranking officials from the Terran Council appeared on the display. They were all watching him with intense interest, as if they had been waiting for this moment. "Captain," one of the council members began, his voice steady but tinged with awe. "You have done the impossible. You've defeated the Xalnari fleet and sent a message to the entire galaxy. Humanity has proven that we are no longer to be underestimated." There was a pause before he continued. "What is our next move?" The captain took a deep breath before answering. "We take our place among the stars. We make it clear that humanity will not be pushed aside. We will defend our own, and we will never stop fighting for our future." His words were strong and resolute, a declaration of intent that would resonate throughout the galaxy. The council members nodded in agreement, and for the first time in a long while the weight of their collective uncertainty began to lift. Humanity was no longer the underdog struggling to survive in the vast expanse of space. They were a force to be reckoned with, and the galaxy would have to adjust. As the Terran Warship made its way back to the fleet, the crew exchanged quiet glances of satisfaction. They had done their part. They had made their stand, and they had proven to themselves and to the universe that humanity would no longer be ignored. They had earned their place in the galaxy, and the road ahead would be theirs to shape. The battle with the Xalnari was over, but the war for humanity's future had just begun, and the galaxy would soon learn that the Terrans were not to be trifled with. That when they fought with everything they had, and they would never back down no matter the odds. And so a new chapter began for humanity. The galaxy had been put on notice, and the Terrans were ready to meet whatever came next.